Hi, everyone. I'm David Rychalsky. I'm a managing director at Capstone Headwaters. We're a national restructuring, corporate finance, investment banking, and debt placement firm. We got about 200 people across the country. I myself, I'm just trying to keep this quick. I myself largely specialize in insolvencies, bankruptcies, and so forth. So, and I guess as we turn it over to my fellow speakers, I think that's probably the best way for them just to give an introduction when they start talking. Today's forum, we chose venue reform, or let's call it also maybe venue shopping. Pre-pandemic, as a preface, pre-pandemic bankruptcy venue reform was certainly a percolating topic of interest to a lot of the practitioners in the field and a lot of stakeholders. And the movement to reform venue, or where a debtor can file for bankruptcy, it really gained a lot of steam, and it culminated sometime, I believe, in late 2018, maybe 2019, pre-pandemic. It culminated in a co-sponsored bill in the Senate by Senators Warren from Massachusetts and Jon Corzine from Texas, two powerful senior. I believe Jon Corzine is a senior senator from Texas. So really put a lot of weight behind it, and it was coming on the heels of the Papagenos bankruptcy in Massachusetts, which was a bankruptcy filed in Delaware, but really where all the stakeholders, the constituencies were Massachusetts. And Elizabeth Warren really kind of took the torch there and said, this is a carbon copy case. This is just public exhibit A of what happens when a debtor and all, runs and hides 1,000 miles away from all of their, all their constituencies and stakeholders. And it presented this gating issue. So the movement was gaining steam, and then the pandemic hit. So, due to the onset of coronavirus and its related lockdowns, the landscape changed, right? So really, this panel is going to explore, the main incentive, at least behind Senator Warren and Corzine's bill, was access. The virtual world we all live in now, the virtual tech world we all live in now, sort of mitigate that factor, right? You can have access from 1,000 miles away. You can get on Zoom. You can certainly go. You can attend hearings remotely. So this grievance that I can't even represent my interest in court because I'd have to pay for plane tickets or send a proxy and take money out of my pocket has changed, and now they have access. So really, what the crux of this panel is venue reform dead as we know it because of increased accessibility, or and even if it wasn't dead, would it even muster enough support these days? Because let's all talk about the obvious, not elephant in the room, but the obvious landscape change. We have a new president, and that new president happens to be from Wilmington, Delaware. A president that, when his time in the Senate, was very instrumental in kind of creating the home court advantage for Wilmington, Delaware. So why would President Biden possibly want to do anything to take away his home court advantage in Wilmington? So really, the considerations we want to talk about here is there more to venue reform or venue considerations than just access? Things like, the judges, the precedents, the United States trustees. It is a more nuanced topic than I think the senators made it out to be in their bill. And that's what we'd like to talk about today. What does venue reform, or what does venue considerations look like in our 2021 midst of a pandemic, coming out of the pandemic world? So just a quick intro to my fellow panelists, and I'll turn it over to them. We thought certainly we need a Delaware lawyer on this one. So Patrick Jackson, who's a partner at Faeger Drinker in Wilmington. Patrick is my counsel. I do 2 assignments. He is my Delaware counsel for 2 assignments for the benefit of creditors. And Patrick is a very skilled national lawyer, but with certainly a Wilmington bent. Although he was educated in Boston, both undergrad and law school. So if he sounds really smart, make sure you discredit that to Massachusetts and not Wilmington. Similarly, David Parham from Akerman, in Dallas, Texas. Anybody that studies the industry knows that Dallas and certainly Texas is getting a lot of considerations for venue, a lot of filings. Obviously, they were Corn is from Texas, co-sponsoring the bill, which may make you scratch your head because Senator Corn's bill may be taking a little momentum away from his home state that seems to be getting the benefit of more filings. And we'll talk about a certain local rule in Houston that may have attracted more filings. And then Oliver as well. Oliver, I hope I don't butcher your last name, Zurbel. Oliver is with the BMC Group. He's going to throw some really good data at us and really add a lot of, Oliver has seen cases all over the country and internationally, and certainly has seen kind of, the considerations for various constituencies and where they may file as well. So with that, I'll stop talking and turn it over to, I guess I'll turn it over to Patrick first, our Delaware resident, and to give himself an intro. Patrick.
Thanks, David. As David said, I'm a partner in the Wilmington, Delaware office of Faeger Drinker. We're a national firm with a national practice, but I do primarily handle matters in my hometown. I'm about 80% a company side in my practice, but I do some asset buyer side. I do some creditor committee work, but where my heart's at is on the company side. And I guess I'll kick off the substantive issues by saying, from my perspective, again, from the company side, in terms of who's choosing where to file, it's going to be the company, and they're going to be thinking about many things higher on the list than running away from their creditors, with apologies to Senator Warren. They're going to be thinking about what are the important issues in the case, what is the precedent at the circuit level of the court that I need to be aware of. If I have a collective bargaining agreement that I need to restructure, I'm not going to file anywhere in the Third Circuit if I can avoid it, because there's horrible precedent that makes it functionally impossible to renegotiate a CBA. If I have valuable rights under an IP license agreement and I'm the licensee, I'm going to think twice about filing in the Third Circuit for the same reason. We have pretty horrible precedent that makes it difficult for licensees to obtain the benefit of their license contracts in bankruptcy. So those are really the things from the legal side that are going to drive venue more than anything. There's also a benefit to predictability, which Delaware used to be the king of that when we had one bankruptcy judge for a couple of years, and then we had two bankruptcy judges for many more years. You got a familiarity with what you were going to get because they were able to develop some stability to their precedents. I think that has changed, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But there's also who is the venue driver, the lender, who's financing the case. It has to be somewhere where the ones who are putting the money into the case are going to be comfortable. And I think that's where the predictability comes in a lot. There's not a lot of precedent at the circuit level about, DIP financing and the like, but there's certainly predictability and a comfort level that lenders, I believe, have with certain jurisdictions and certain judges. And that's also going to be a factor. So I think from the planning side, on the company side, that's really the big driver. And the idea that I'm going to, choose to file in Delaware so that I can avoid, so that I can make my Massachusetts creditors hop on a train, it's not really high on the list. In fact, it's not really on my list at all of considerations, but I get that that's the kind of political impetus behind, Warren's push for venue reform. So with that, I guess we can maybe stick with the legal perspective. I'll hand off to David for the Texas perspective on this side.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. I'm David Parham. I'm a partner in the Dallas office of Akerman. Akerman is a national general practice firm with about 700 lawyers in 25 offices really across the country. Our insolvency group, we've got about 25 lawyers, many of them in Florida, but we also have insolvency lawyers in New York and Chicago and LA, as well as obviously Texas. And in terms of the insolvency practice, my practice is predominantly on the company side, but I do obviously committee work and represent creditors in cases as well, secured and unsecured. And that fairly reflects Akerman's practice. I think outside of Dallas, it's probably a pretty even split between the creditor and debtor side. We also have a fraud and recovery practice that focuses on SEC receiverships in general and Ponzi schemes in particular. But to get back to the topic of the day, venue shopping, it's interesting because in Texas, we've always, or for many years, felt that we were on the short end of the venue shopping deal. And companies here were all headed to Delaware and to New York, and there was a lot of angst in in the Texas bar, which is probably why you see Senator Cornyn being the focal point of a venue bill. That has changed, and we're all, at least down here, we're all pretty happy about that. In Houston, where a number of these large cases, particularly the oil and gas cases, but also some retail cases such as Neiman Marcus and J.C. Penney's recently have filed. They passed a local rule, or adopted a local rule, I guess is a better way to say it, a couple of years ago, where only two judges, Judges Isker and Judge Jones, would handle all of the complex cases that were filed in the Southern District of Texas. And so that accomplished one major goal, which was to provide predictability, at least in terms of the court. And I totally agree with Patrick, particularly as a debtor's lawyer. Running away from creditors really isn't the issue. The issue is there precedent in the circuit that's going to help your case? And then predictability, particularly with the courts. And we've addressed that, I think, in Texas and in Dallas also, because we've started to attract cases here. So we're kind of happy to be on the positive side of the venue search, these days. And I do think it's going to remain an issue in terms of the venue and shopping, because, I think as you go across the country, there are just a number of courts that just aren't set up for the larger cases. I think on the smaller cases, it's not such an issue, but on the larger cases, you really do want to get in front of a judge that you have confidence in and know you're going to get a good judge, and also obviously the precedence issues. Just kind of, in hourly rates, because you get into a lot of these, frankly, courts, particularly in more rural areas or smaller population areas, where you run into, rate restrictions. And in fact, we've got a district in Texas, that Eastern District, where they still try to enforce local rates. And as a result, they don't get the big cases. And, J.C. Penney, for example, was probably 10 minutes from a courthouse in the Eastern District of Texas, and they went to Houston instead. So you kind of see that as also, I think, a factor that comes into play as you try and decide where you're going to go. On the COVID side, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these courts operate when they come out and when we go back and we fully reopen. I know there are a number of people who, myself included, frankly, who really want to get back in court. I think that you lose a lot when everything, as much as we like Zoom and as convenient as it can be, I do think you lose a lot because you're not able to really judge, the credibility of the witnesses nearly as well. You can't read the court, and I think most importantly, you lose the ability to do deals on the courthouse steps. And a lot gets done when all the parties have to get together and sit in a courtroom, and they realize that if they don't get something done, then the judge is going to decide it for them, and that may be really good or it may be really bad. And it's kind of sometimes better to pick your poison and cut a deal. So I think there is that. But there also, I think there's always going to be an element of this that's going to go forward. And I think courts are going to be more flexible in terms of allowing people to appear remotely, whether it be by, Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever. And I think that really helps in terms of access of witnesses and parties, because you can now with the video, you can attract, you can call witnesses that you might otherwise not have been able to get to the courthouse, either for a cost reason or logistics, particularly with all the COVID restrictions on travel that we've had. I have a confirmation hearing next week in a case, and one of our key witnesses is in Wuhan, China, and there's just absolutely no way we would get that witness here unless we were doing it, remotely as we will. So there's two sides to the coin, I suppose. But I think you're going to see as we open up that different courts are going to handle it differently. But I think there's always going to be this element that's going to be present in terms of use of video. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Oliver or whatever other panelist wants to
I think
chime in,
Oliver.
or
Sure.
I think, yeah, Oliver. Oliver, you're on mute.
Someone muted me from the other side. Thanks, David, Marianne, and to all of you that I know here, from Joe DeToli, who oddly was a co-worker 15 years ago in our past life, in our past company, through Rob, and I will attest that Rob does see people that I don't even know who they are, and he's like, "Do you know who that is?" And he'll go straight over, and he's done this before. And next thing, I'm sitting next to Jon Corzine, who, as a New Jersey resident of the past, was my governor at the time, although I was too young to vote, I think. So my perspective on all of this is that I've been involved in little pieces of cases from literally Hawaii down to Florida, where I now live. I took the southern migration route, and hence my idea of changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes. And we really just wanted to speak about venue reform, venue shopping, but also venue shift. And some of it is just seismic, as David and Patrick had described, the reasons for why people are going where. But you have seen a southern migration of cases, so to speak, and it's something that I followed. And unlike maybe other people on this call, my perspective is not where the filing occurs really, but a size level of the case, or maybe the number of creditors that are involved. And so in Hawaii, this was the sale of a poi farm that took place, and our secured data room facilitated that transaction. In Florida, it was a large mortgage lender and broker. But the point of it is, I look at data a lot, and I look at filings a lot. And so anything that has some substance for what we would do, I'm watching where it went in, who filed it, where it's gone. And then to further go back and crunch some of this data through our resources, and I'm happy to share some highlights that I've sort of studied with everybody on this call as a follow-up. You do see tremendously active jurisdictions like Atlanta filing a whole bunch of bankruptcy, but these are not necessarily business bankruptcies. Let's not take subchapter 5 out of the conversation, because that's sub 8 million. So in the term of cases that are business bankruptcies 10 million plus, or maybe even for the people on this call, 50 million plus, there's not as much activity in terms of raw numbers. And we do see Texas has been a recipient of a lot of increase. Delaware's hold somewhat firm, but you have interesting jurisdictions where filings are going to be occurring due to the simple fact that they really can't take it to Texas or to take it to Delaware. As Peter Hartheimer described, they have a tremendous business in ABCs. We're pleased to work with Sherwood on some of these, and essentially that's a California thing. Florida has a unique venue rule where you may not get a committee if you file in Florida, because the UST takes up that role. And I've seen a number of sort of interesting retail cases pushed to Jacksonville for that reason. So, David really illustrated how the Zoom can, remove the need for conversation around travel related to venue reform. Patrick explained why venue shopping is related to core issues that may not have to do with geography, more so for rulings. People have spoke about the fees that are questioned by judges. Atlanta is a great example where there's some consideration as to the judge's opinion of lawyer fees. But realistically, there's an overarching question of, just what does the data show as this shift of venue? And, it raises more questions than answers. And, I think it's going to be very interesting to see if Chicago, for example, Atlanta, other, kind of core business jurisdictions follow what the Houston rule is. And I'll let others go back to how that evolved. And really bring more cases into their local courts by sort of saying, okay, we've got great judges on the bench. They were former bankruptcy attorneys. A few of them I know in Atlanta and Chicago. Let those people sort of raise their hand and take the big mega bankruptcy cases. and build some confidence that they're not going to create rulings that are, out of line with the national average, so to speak. So, on that sort of note, I want to just kind of pass this along and keep it moving. Maybe people have great questions and comments about the subject of venue, but I'm glad we landed on a subject that's timely and is, a great conversation to have. And like a year from now, revisit it again and see, hey, what's happened with venue in the last year, track the data.
David, it's Rob here. I had a sort of a mechanical question that maybe David or Patrick are better addressed. David from Akerman, you bring up an interesting point of the mechanics and the logistics of current court. How does it work where I guess you have 50 states and each state has its own COVID return to work policy, but I could just see conflicting mandates between some folks, not just the judges, but some of the trustees and some of the support people around that may either feel uncomfortable going in person, but at the same time, you've got some folks that say, we want to do things in person in combination with technology and virtual. How is that going to play out? And what's your sense of the phase in based on, I guess some of this is driven on the on vaccine distribution and folks' mindset, of being supportive of that. But I'd be curious as to the Texas and the Wilmington perspective here.
Well, what I've seen, and I'm in cases in Colorado and in Florida and other states as well, but what I'm seeing is that generally speaking, it's left pretty much to the courts. And so it's going to depend on how the court feels. And I think you're right in terms of where the vaccine is and what the state laws are. Obviously in Texas, our governor thinks that COVID is not a thing anymore. And so we don't have a mask or anything, but the courts still do. That said, the courts in Dallas County, for example, are starting to have jury trials. And so we're seeing it, people are coming back to the courthouse. But I think that it's going to be, particularly in the bankruptcy system, largely a function of how the courts feel. And I do think they'll take into account, how their staffs feel. And if people aren't comfortable with in person, then I think in those courts, the video will be longer. I think you'll see in some courts, will open faster as people are just more comfortable and the situation's better. It's also going to be interesting to see how that works with, particularly in the short run, as people, you're going to have some people who are comfortable and some people who are not comfortable. And I think courts are going to be sensitive to trying to force people to come back if they're not comfortable, because they don't want to be disadvantaged by the other party showing up in person. So I do think that there's going to be a lot of care taken in that respect, and probably the courts are going to reopen slower because the judges are going to be very sensitive about trying to force people to come in, either because they won't make video available, which is unlikely, or more to the point because people just feel like it disadvantages them if they don't, so they come regardless. So I think that is going to be a real driving force in terms of how fast these courts open. And frankly, I don't, who knows in terms of time, but, if the vaccinations go as they're talking about, I'm hopeful that, people feel comfortable enough to open up by late summer, but we'll see. Again, I think it's just going to depend. If you've got a judge that's in a high risk category and he's nervous about it, that court is probably going to stay shut down for, a good period of time, probably.
Yeah, just real quick on the Delaware side, we're kind of an easy case because it's a small state. There's only 3 counties in the state. The Supreme Court, has been pretty conservative as far as risk averse, I should say, conservative about the pandemic. So they've been locked down virtual since very early. And the federal court, it's separate. The federal courts could issue different rules if they want, but in Delaware, there's a pretty close coordination between the state and federal court. And since most of the judicial activity happens in Newcastle County, where Wilmington is, it's pretty seamless. So there's not any, the Chancery Court is operating under much the same principles that the bankruptcy court is, and I don't see that changing. Now that differs in bigger states. I live in Pennsylvania. My wife works at the clerk's office for the criminal court, state criminal court near where we live, and it's a total mess. I mean, it's just this courthouse is open because the president judge there decided that these are the parameters, and then the state Supreme Court is doing a different thing, and the federal courts are doing different things. So luckily, from my perspective in Delaware, it's a lot easier and it's very uniform how our courts are dealing with it. But I imagine it is going to be very piecemeal, especially because the state and the federal courts are totally free to do different things. So I think there is going to be a readjustment. I think right now everybody's kind of working on the same parameters, with the exception of, like David said, now Texas is open for business. So I guess they're kind of breaking away from the norm. But I think as things loosen up, you're going to see everything refracturing. We've been enjoying for the last couple of months some stability in terms of how court proceedings nationwide have been happening. And I think people are kind of settling into a groove, but we're going to have to readjust. And I have no idea what those adjustments are going to be. So we'll all see.
And then Oliver and David, just a quick shout out. Dwayne Morrison has joined us. I was hoping he would join, and he has perspective from Canada. He's with Cortland Credit. And Dwayne, I'm not sure if you're able to come on, but I think the fact that you're looking at things Canadian based, but then, at the various states, if that affects some of the strategies that you all have in your structure.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, good to see everybody. Some familiar faces here. Yeah, nothing so far. I mean, Cortland does everything from turnaround restructuring type financings on a debt basis to acquisition organic growth so far. Most of the proceedings that we've seen up here in Canada have gone, the virtual route has been generally from my lawyer, both the lawyers that we utilize and on an ongoing basis, and then even acquaintances, professionals that I know in the legal community. I mean, generally it's gone fairly smoothly. So, and there's some things that probably practices that will continue going forward, and some other ones. The gentleman from the law firm in Texas there, I've heard that comment too about the inability to have the face-to-face interaction with people and to be able to negotiate during the court proceedings for whatever matters under review. There's something obviously that gets lost in that, not having that ability to interact with people on a face-to-face basis. But generally, it's gone smoother than I think a lot of people, especially after the initial shock, a lot smoother than many people expected it to be. The courts adapted fairly quickly, and the legal community. I mean, in order to get a movement of files through, everybody just adapted and things move forward. Still early days for us relative to our dealings in the U.S. courts. We're starting to get involved in some processes where there's U.S. court processes that we're being asked to involve ourselves in from a capital providing financing standpoint, but still early days to kind of opine on that, I guess, on what we're seeing.
Rob, thanks for the introduction to Dwayne, and to hear from our friendly friends from north of the border. I know that there was a recent large cross-border energy restructuring where it went from Canada right down to David's neck of the woods in the Houston courts, I believe. But an interesting question, I think, for maybe David and Brian, but just for the edification of the other people on this call, what does this look like when the financial advisor realizes, okay, this company's toast, they're going to have to file, there's no other way out of this? And then talking with your counsel, what is the conversation like around venue? Like, okay, where are we going to put this in? Well, it should be here. No, don't do it there. It should be there. Or is the underlying client, very, specific about what they want to see because of some idea that they have in their mind? Or, how does this venue shop actually take place in terms of experiences that you've had?
Sure. Generally, I mean, we mostly deal in the middle market now, although Brian and I used to deal in some mega cases in our KPMG days. Traditionally, the middle market, they're going to defer to their professionals. They usually don't have venue considerations because they just don't know enough about it. Generally speaking, us and the lawyers will look at it from a strategic standpoint. Much like Patrick said, if you have a CBA in there, that's going to drive some considerations. I think also how complex the issues are. I think in Dan Lee, we were in a case together, 6 years ago, where we did a 363 and we wanted to be in and out in 60 to 90 days, just based on, the kind of nuances of the case. And Delaware is where you had to go. If you want to be in and out, even though the company was based in Boston and had a footprint everywhere, we weren't going to get out in 60 to 90 days in Massachusetts. So you went where there was predictability. Similarly speaking, we had a case in California and we never ended up filing, but there was such complex issues that we felt like that the local courts in California, or even some other courts where they could have filed, wouldn't. The judges, there was an uncertainty there, and we wanted to go where we could be in front of a judge that had seen complex, nuanced issues and could think deeper than just kind of your top level. So often, from the financial advisor standpoint, it's a very strategic view, and you basically start with where you want to see the case end, and you work your way backwards, and you try to find the good venue. At the same time, and I'll end with, you also want to be careful that you don't go file in another district where you may have a venue fight. And maybe one of your key constituencies is going to try to pull it back to where you do business. And that's a bad thing. You don't want to start off the case with losing a venue fight, because it's bad momentum. It starts you off on the wrong foot and you're playing catch up after that. So
I've seen that.
yeah, it can definitely kill momentum. So I know we're out of time, Marianne. Just from my perspective, thank you for everybody for joining. I know this is kind of a topic that I don't think is dead, but in conclusion, I think we've all kind of proven that the issues go deeper than just hiding from your creditors, as the politicians make it sound. But I think the consensus is clear, is that the bankruptcy practitioners want choice. And that choice is because they want predictability or they want options. And unless I'm wrong, I don't think there's a strong appetite in the bankruptcy industry for venue reform. And if somebody disagrees with me, they can certainly make their case.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you for bringing this topic forward as one of our first topic of many series. So, we welcome, if you have any questions, comment, or ideas for future, let us know. We're open to just create these forums together with everybody. So, so whenever you guys reach out, you can reach out to Rob or myself, and we look forward to connecting further with you, and have a great 2021 this year.
So, and Marianne, we're thinking about another restructuring one next month, yes?
Yes, we do. And now I don't have, Oliver, you might have it, because Oliver has been great. And like the topic we had in mind for number 2, which was that, Oliver?
I can't remember what exactly was placed, but the subjects of the 11 chapters do include subchapter 5, does include PPP loans, and then maybe more interesting things of like how video is going to transform travel, when will we be going back to conferences. There's a bunch of things that seem to be of more interest to people than others. So I believe we do have published the proposed next 10 chapters, but I'm unsure as to what number 2 was.
Next is subchapter 5. Others include intercreditor disputes, inventory liquidation, retail wind downs, lender's perspective, iBanking, PPP loans, lender fatigue, role of the CRO, diversity, and recent court opinions. And that's when we're going to drink together, I hope. All in person.
Well, I think the benefit of this too is, these are great topic areas, but I think as Marianne and Alan said earlier, a lot of this too is, and David, you're very right about, there's a lot of the on the court kind of side chats that are valuable. So this could be interesting along the way, as far as opting in to engage with dialogue with fellow attendees. And topics are made to be moldable clay. But great turnout today for a kickoff, and I think this is something to digest on and build upon. So thanks to a number of first-time folks and folks who accepted the invitation. And it's great to meet some new people. And David, maybe I'll give you the last word, David Rychalsky, since you did a great job moderating the panel.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being part of the discussion. There's a lot more of these chapters coming up. And if anybody has any comments afterwards, or if anybody wants to say things offline and say, I'll never file in this court, we'd love to hear it. But let's not do anything wrong. But for the most part, nice to meet everyone. Thanks for listening in, and look forward to more.